When I visited my parents for New Year, I found my photos torn up in the trash. Mom said casually, "We're redecorating. No point keeping pictures of our biggest mistake." My brother laughed. "He still shows up like we actually want him here." Uncle announced, "We have a betting pool on when he'll finally get the hint." Mom continued, "We turned his old room into storage, more useful than he ever was." Everyone roared. I smiled, took out their trash, left quietly. Now they're outside my apartment at 2 a.m., pounding, sobbing. "We were joking. Please answer. We're your family. Don't destroy us." Before I tell you exactly what I did to bring these arrogant people to their knees in the middle of a freezing Chicago winter night, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. The pounding on my apartment door was so violent it rattled the heavy brass coat hooks screwed into my hallway wall. It was exactly 1:58 in the morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island, wide awake, staring at a cup of black coffee that had gone ice-cold hours ago. I didn't flinch when the first heavy fist hit the solid oak door. I just listened to the sound echo through my quiet, dark apartment. "Matthew, please, open the door." The voice was raw, desperate, and tearing through the dead silence of my building. It was my father, Robert, a man who had spent my entire 27 years of life speaking to me only in disappointed sighs, sarcastic remarks, and sharp commands. Now he was shouting my name like a drowning man begging for a rope. Then came my mother's voice, "Evelyn. Matthew, sweetheart, please answer the door. We know you're in there. We saw the lights from the street. We're your family. Don't do this to us." She was sobbing. Not her usual delicate, manipulative tears she used to get her way at country club luncheons. These were real, ugly, breathless sobs. I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor. I walked slowly down the short hallway of my apartment. The floorboards were cold against my bare feet. I didn't turn on a single light. I just leaned my forehead against the heavy wood of the door and looked through the glass peephole. The harsh, unforgiving fluorescent light of the apartment hallway illuminated a scene I will absolutely never forget. There they were. My father, a man usually so obsessed with his manicured image, had his expensive cashmere winter coat misbuttoned. His face was sickly pale, his jaw tight, and he was bracing his weight against the doorframe like his legs might give out. Beside him was my mother, her designer mascara running down her cheeks in dark, jagged lines. She had both her hands clasped together in front of her chest, practically praying to the wooden door separating us. Standing slightly behind them, looking like he might vomit right there on the hallway runner, was my older brother, Elijah, the golden child. The guy who drove a brand new Porsche, bragged relentlessly about his massive real estate salary, and treated everyone like peasants. Right now, stripped of his arrogance, he just looked like a terrified little boy with nowhere left to hide. "It was just a joke," my mother wailed, slamming her open palms against the door again. "The trash bag, the photos, Matthew, we were just kidding around. You know how your Uncle Carter is, he gets carried away with the wine. Please, if you don't stop this, we're gonna lose everything. The house, the cars, everything." I stood there in the dark, my breathing perfectly steady. My chest didn't ache. I didn't feel a shred of pity. I didn't even feel anger anymore. The anger had burned itself out completely. I just felt a deep, overwhelming, and absolute sense of clarity. For 27 years, I was the ghost in their house. I was the punchline to their jokes. I was the mistake they never let me forget. And yet, for the last 3 years, I was the only reason they still had a roof over their heads. They didn't know that, of course. They thought they were invincible. They thought they could humiliate me, throw my face in the garbage, and wake up the next day to their perfect, curated lives without any consequences. I reached out and let my fingertips brush against the cold metal of the deadbolt. I didn't turn it. I just wanted to feel the physical barrier between my newfound peace and their utter chaos. They thought my silence earlier that evening in their kitchen was me rolling over and taking the abuse, just like I always did. They thought taking out their trash was my ultimate act of pathetic submission. They had no idea that when I walked out of their house with that black plastic bag, I wasn't just carrying away torn photographs. I was carrying away the very foundation of their fake, luxurious lives. To understand how we ended up on opposite sides of a locked door at 2 in the morning, you need to know what happened 3 years ago. You need to know about a promise made in a quiet hospital room, and how the people who share my blood turned a dead man's legacy into a weapon against me. The smell of a hospital room never really leaves your memory. It's that sharp, sterile mix of bleach, rubbing alcohol, and old linen. 3 years ago, I sat in a room exactly like that, holding my Grandpa Joseph's hand. He was the only person in the Bennett family who ever looked at me and actually saw me. My parents were down the hall in the cafeteria. Even with my grandfather dying, they were loudly complaining about the vending machine coffee and debating who would inherit the antique dining table. Elijah wasn't even at the hospital. He claimed he had an urgent closing for a commercial real estate deal that couldn't wait. But I saw the photos he posted later that night from a downtown steakhouse, celebrating a promotion. Grandpa Joseph's breathing was incredibly shallow. The heart monitor beeped in a slow, tired rhythm. He squeezed my fingers. His grip was surprisingly firm for a man whose heart was actively giving out. "Matthew," he whispered. His voice was raspy, dry as sandpaper. "You're the quiet one. Always have been. You're the only one in this family who actually listens when people speak. The rest of them, they just wait for their turn to talk." I tried to smile for him, but my throat was too tight. I just squeezed his hand back. "Your father," Grandpa Joseph continued, taking a labored, rattling breath. "Robert is a fool with money. He always has been. He cares more about looking rich than being stable. When I'm gone, things are going to fall apart quickly." He told me in hushed tones about a private reserve account he had set up, a secret inheritance of sorts, but not the kind of inheritance you blow on a sports car or a vacation home. It was meant to be an emergency dam, a financial failsafe to keep the family home from being swept away when my father inevitably drove their finances off a cliff. "Don't let them lose the house, Matthew," he pleaded, his faded blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that scared me. "It's the only decent thing I ever built in my life. Promise me you'll keep an eye on it. Keep the lights on. Pay the taxes if they can't. Just keep the house standing for them. They don't know how to survive the real world." I promised him. I was 24 years old, working entry-level hours at an audio archival studio, barely making rent on my own tiny apartment, but I promised him. He passed away 2 days later. At the funeral, the rain came down in freezing sheets. My mother wore a designer black dress and wept loudly, but only whenever anyone with a high net worth walked past her umbrella. My father shook hands with the guests, speaking in deep, solemn tones about the heavy burden of taking over the family legacy. Elijah showed up late, adjusting a Rolex I knew was fake, and actually handed out business cards at the reception. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody noticed when I stayed behind at the cemetery, standing in the mud while the groundskeepers lowered the casket, while the rest of them rushed off to the catered luncheon. A week after the funeral, I sat in a stuffy lawyer's office. Grandpa Joseph had arranged for a third-party trust to handle the reserve, and he had secretly made me the sole overseer. He knew if he gave the money directly to my father, it would be gone in a month on bad investments and luxury cars. Sure enough, it didn't take long for the cracks to show in my parents' perfect facade. For months after Grandpa died, the first notice arrived at my apartment, forwarded by the trust lawyer. It was a massive gap in the property tax payment. My father had simply ignored the bill. I logged into the trust portal, verified the amount, and quietly paid it. Then came the mortgage gaps, the utility shut-off warnings, the lapsed homeowner's insurance. Every time my father missed a payment so he could lease a new luxury SUV, or every time my mother blew $5,000 on a necessary kitchen remodel to impress her country club friends, I stepped in. I funneled the reserve money to cover the debts. I kept the Bennett family afloat. I never said a single word. I thought maybe if I just kept doing the right thing, they would eventually soften. I thought maybe they would see my value without me having to scream for their attention. Instead, the more secure they felt in their finances, blindly assuming my father was just a genius at managing their money, the crueler they became towards me. They worshipped Elijah. He was the golden child, the standard I could never reach. He talked fast, dressed sharp, and threw words around like portfolio and equity at every family gathering. When he got a major promotion at his brokerage firm, my parents threw a massive dinner party at the house to celebrate his new salary. During the toasts, my father stood up, raised his crystal glass and said, "To Elijah, the son who actually knows how to make something of the Bennett name." I was sitting at the far end of the table. My mother leaned over and loudly whispered to my Aunt Sarah, "Thank God we have one child who isn't a complete dead weight. Matthew's still playing with tape recorders in a basement somewhere. I worry he'll be asking us for a handout soon." I stared at my plate. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth physically ached. But I didn't say anything. I just swallowed the humiliation, exactly like I had been trained to do since I was a child. My best friend, Samuel, was the only one who knew the truth. We were having beers after work one night, and I told him about the trust. Samuel slammed his bottle on the bar. "Are you insane, Matthew? They treat you like dirt, and you're secretly paying their mortgage? Cut them off. Let them fail. You're enabling their abuse." "I made a promise to my grandfather," I argued. "Your grandfather didn't want you to be a martyr for people who hate you," Samuel shot back. I brushed off his advice. This toxic dynamic dragged on for 3 long years. They lived in a beautiful, sprawling home, completely unaware that the ground beneath it was being held together by the sun they treated like a disease. Which brings us to New Year's Eve. I hadn't planned on going home. I wanted to stay in my apartment, order takeout, and watch movies in peace. But my mother called and left a voicemail, laying on a thick, manipulative guilt trip about family unity. She said Aunt Sarah was going through a messy divorce and a brutal custody battle, so everyone needed to be there to show support. Like an absolute idiot, I drove the 40 minutes out to the suburbs in the freezing snow. I had to park on the street, 3 blocks away, because Elijah's Porsche and my parents' 2 SUVs were taking up the entire driveway and the front curb. I walked into the house, stomping the snow off my boots. The smell of roasted garlic, expensive wine, and burning cedar from the fireplace hit me. The kitchen was packed. My parents, Elijah, Aunt Sarah, Uncle Carter, and a few cousins were all standing around the massive marble island. I walked over to set down the bottle of wine I had brought. That's when I saw it. Sitting right next to the pristine counter was a heavy black trash bag. It was slouched open at the top. I glanced inside, just out of habit, thinking maybe someone had thrown away a glass or a plate. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. Right at the top of the garbage, stained with wet coffee grounds and an orange rind, was my high school graduation photo. The wooden frame was snapped in half. The glass was shattered. I reached in, my hands trembling slightly, and pulled it out. My fingers brushed against more glossy paper. I kept pulling. It was an absolute massacre of my childhood. My 3rd grade school portrait. The Polaroid from my 10th birthday party. The one where Grandpa Joseph bought me my first guitar. The photo booth strip from when I got my first apartment. Every single version of me that had ever existed in that house was torn, folded, ripped, and dumped like spoiled leftovers. I stood there holding the torn pieces of my own face. The loud chatter in the kitchen slowly died down as they noticed me holding the trash. My mother didn't even blink. She didn't look embarrassed. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her red wine, leaned back against the counter, and said it with terrifying ease. "We're redecorating, Matthew. We decided to go for a more minimalist look in the den. There's really no point in keeping pictures of our biggest mistake on display for company to see." Someone snorted. It was Elijah. He was leaning against the stainless steel refrigerator, holding a craft beer. "Man, I don't get it," he laughed, shaking his head. "He still shows up like we actually want him here. Have some self-respect, bro." Uncle Carter, his face flushed red from drinking too much scotch, slammed his hand on the counter. I told you. We have a betting pool going on when he'll finally get the hint and stop coming around. I've got my money on Valentine's Day. Sarah thinks Easter. Aunt Sarah, the woman I supposedly came to support through her divorce, just giggled behind her hand and looked away, completely complicit. Then my mother delivered the final blow. Her voice was smooth, practiced, and completely devoid of any maternal warmth. Honestly, Matthew, we finally cleared out your old bedroom upstairs. We turned it into a temperature-controlled storage space for your father's wine collection. It's already far more useful than you ever were in this house. The room roared with laughter. Loud, comfortable, familiar laughter. They were performing for each other, and I was the prop. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who was chuckling and nodding along. I looked at Elijah, who was smirking at me like I was a bug he had just stepped on. I didn't yell. I didn't curse at them. I didn't cry. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all my organs and filled the space with ice water. I carefully placed the torn photos back into the black trash bag, making sure the shattered glass didn't cut through the plastic. I gathered the top of the bag, twisted it tight, and tied a firm knot. I looked up at my mother and forced a small, polite smile. "I'll just take this out for you," I said quietly. I picked up the bag, turned my back on my family, and walked out the front door into the freezing night. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently behind me. They thought they had won. They thought they had finally broken me down so far that I was literally taking out their garbage on my way out of their lives. They had absolutely no idea that I had just walked out with the one thing that was going to destroy their entire world. The drive back to my apartment in Chicago should have taken 40 minutes. I barely made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over. I parked under a flickering orange streetlight. The heater in my car was blasting, but my hands gripping the steering wheel were freezing cold. I stared at the black trash bag sitting in the passenger seat. I wasn't shaking because I was sad. The sadness had burned off the second my mother called me a mistake. I was shaking because of the sheer, terrifying clarity of what I needed to do next. The family I had spent my life trying to please didn't exist. They were parasites wearing designer clothes. I reached over and untied the knot I had made. I wanted to pull out the Polaroid from my 10th birthday. I figured I could at least wipe the coffee stains off it and keep the memory of my grandfather. I dug my hand past the torn graduation photo. But my fingers didn't brush against photo paper. They hit something thick and heavy. I frowned and pulled it out. It was a thick manila envelope, heavily sealed with packing tape. My father's messy handwriting was scrawled across the front in thick black marker. Estate docs/bank reviews. I dug deeper into the trash. Beneath the envelope were 3 old mini-cassette tapes, the kind people used to use for answering machines, and a cracked digital voice recorder. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that digital recorder. Years ago, before I became a professional audio engineer, I used to leave recorders around the house to capture family histories. I had lost that specific recorder 5 years ago. I thought it was gone forever. I ripped open the manila envelope. The streetlight outside was too dim, so I aggressively punched the button for the dome light in my car. The first paper I pulled out was a formal letter from a lawyer. I scanned the dense legal jargon. My eyes locked onto the bold text at the bottom. It was a formal notice of intent to initiate foreclosure proceedings on the family home. I grabbed the next paper. It was a home equity line of credit statement from a major bank. The balance was entirely maxed out. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in the red. Next was a massive, unpaid IRS tax lien notice. Then, at the very bottom of the stack was a real estate transfer form. It was half filled out, bearing my father's signature, with my mother's official notary stamp on a separate attached page. I sat there in the freezing car, the engine idling loudly, reading the documents over and over until the printed words blurred together. They weren't just in debt. They were drowning. The walls were completely caving in on them. Suddenly, the jokes in the kitchen made sickening, perfect sense. The minimalist redecorating. Turning my room into storage. They weren't refreshing the house. They were staging it. They were getting ready to sell it out from under themselves before the bank showed up to change the locks. But there was a massive, glaring discrepancy. I knew exactly how much money Grandpa Joseph had left in that reserve account. I had been managing it down to the penny. Even with their reckless, stupid spending, the reserve should have been more than enough to cover the mortgage and taxes for at least another 2 full years. There was absolutely no way they should be facing foreclosure right now. Unless someone had drained the reserve from the inside. I dropped the papers onto the passenger seat, grabbed the cracked digital recorder, and threw my car into drive. I broke 3 speed limits getting back to my apartment. I burst through my front door, ignoring my heavy coat and snow-covered boots, and went straight to my workstation in the living room. I am an archival audio engineer. I restore sound for a living. I take dead, corrupted, impossible audio and bring it back to life. It's what I do better than anyone. I plugged the digital recorder into my interface. It was completely dead. The screen shattered. I had to carefully dismantle the plastic casing, extract the internal memory chip with tweezers, and wire it directly to a reader. It took me 45 agonizing minutes of delicate soldering and typing command lines before the files finally populated on my monitor. There were dozens of corrupted audio files. I sorted them by date. I found the most recent one, created just 2 weeks ago. The recorder must have been tossed into a junk drawer in the kitchen years ago and accidentally switched on when someone slammed the drawer shut hard enough to jar the record button. I loaded the file into my software. It was buried under a thick layer of static, the hum of the refrigerator, and the clinking of dishes. I put on my heavy studio headphones, isolated the frequencies, rolled off the low-end rumble, and boosted the vocal range. The static parted like a curtain. Tell Julian the final paperwork will be ready by the 15th. It was my father's voice. He didn't sound arrogant. He sounded panicked, his voice thin and reedy. Robert, you can't stall Julian forever. He's a cash buyer, he's going to want to see clear title, my mother replied. Her voice was sharp, annoyed. I know that, Evelyn. Don't you think I know that? My father's voice cracked. The bank is freezing everything. The lawyer said if we don't clear the lien, the sale is dead. We lose the house to the bank. There was a long pause on the recording, filled only by the sound of ice clinking against glass as someone poured a drink. Then my mother spoke. Her voice was a venomous whisper. What about Joseph's reserve? There has to be more in there. We can pull from it. I took it all, Evelyn. My father hissed, his voice trembling. I took it 6 months ago to cover the margin calls on my stock portfolio. I thought the market would bounce back. Didn't. The money is gone. I forged Matthew's signature on the release forms to bypass the trust lock. I stopped breathing. My hands hovered over my computer keyboard, violently shaking. My father hadn't just mismanaged the money. He had committed severe wire fraud. He had stolen the inheritance Grandpa Joseph meant to save the house, and he actively forged my name to bypass the security I had put in place. I pressed the spacebar to play the rest. My God, Robert, my mother said. She didn't sound angry about the massive crime her husband just confessed to. She only sounded annoyed at the inconvenience it caused her. Fine. So the house is gone. How do we explain this to Carter and Sarah? We can't let them know we're broke. They'll laugh at us. My father sighed heavily. We blame Matthew. We tell everyone that Joseph left the house solely to Matthew, and that Matthew promised to buy us out so we could retire, but then he backed out at the last minute out of spite. We tell them Matthew abandoned the family. Everyone already thinks he's a bitter loser. They'll believe it. Perfect. My mother agreed smoothly, without a second of hesitation. He is a bitter loser. He'll never speak up to defend himself anyway. I hit the spacebar again. The audio stopped. The silence in my apartment was deafening, pressing against my eardrums. You can survive cruelty for a long time. You can build thick calluses over your heart. But hearing absolute, undeniable proof that the cruelty wasn't just careless, that it was a strategic, calculated weapon meant to destroy your reputation to cover their own crimes, that changes a man at a cellular level. I didn't feel hollow anymore. I felt like a loaded gun. I opened a new tab on my browser. I logged into the third-party portal that managed the remaining fragments of Grandpa's trust and the autopay systems I had set up to keep the house's utilities and basic insurances running out of my own pocket. For 3 years, I had been the silent engine keeping their lights on. I clicked on the property tax autopay. Cancel. I clicked on the emergency utility float. Cancel. I clicked on the homeowner's insurance bridge. Cancel. I clicked on the mortgage gap coverage. Cancel. I ended every single transfer. I stripped away every layer of financial armor I had secretly built around them. I left them completely, totally exposed to the financial hurricane they had created for themselves. Then I exported the cleaned audio file. I saved it to 3 different hard drives and uploaded it to a secure cloud server. I took high-resolution photos of the forged documents, the lawyer letters, the tax liens. I built a digital fortress of evidence. Chain of custody is practically a reflex for me. It was 4 a.m. I picked up my phone and texted Samuel. I finally cut the cord. I have proof of everything. I'm letting them burn. Samuel replied 2 minutes later. It's about damn time. Drink some water. Go to sleep. Tomorrow is going to be wild. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the Chicago skyline wake up, waiting for the storm to finally hit. At exactly 9:13 the next morning, my phone vibrated on the kitchen table. The caller ID flashed. Elijah. I let it ring 3 times. I took a slow sip of coffee, cleared my throat, and swiped the green button to answer. Yeah, I said, keeping my voice entirely flat, devoid of any emotion. Matthew, Elijah said. He was trying to sound authoritative, using his big brother doing you a favor voice, but I could hear a slight, frantic tremor underneath it. Mom is freaking out. She thinks you took something from the house last night by accident. I looked at the forged bank documents and the cracked digital recorder sitting next to my laptop. Did I? I asked softly. Don't start with the cryptic crap, man. Elijah snapped, his patience instantly vanishing. You always make everything so dramatic. Mom saw you take the trash bag. She realized Dad threw away some old work files in there by mistake. Old audio cassettes and some bank envelopes. Dad needs them back. Today. There it was. Not a single word of apology for the night before. No remorse for tearing up my face and calling me a mistake in front of a room full of people. Just the family script continuing exactly as planned, expecting me to fall right into line. What exactly am I accused of taking, Elijah? I asked, leaning back in my chair. He hesitated. The silence stretched for a few seconds. Just some old recordings. Dad needs them for his accountant. And some envelopes. Why do you even care? Just bring the bag back to the house. I care, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Because last night, your family tore up my childhood photographs and laughed in my face while I stood there. So if anyone wants anything from me today, they can start by telling the absolute truth. Elijah's voice hardened. You're unbelievable. You're really gonna hold a grudge over some stupid pictures? You know, Mom and Dad are under a lot of pressure right now with the market. I know exactly how much pressure they're under, Elijah, I said. I'm the one who's been removing it for 3 years. Dead silence on the other end of the line. What the hell are you talking about? He finally asked, his voice quieter now, the bravado slipping. The property taxes, the mortgage gaps, the utilities, the insurance bridges. I listed them off systematically. Grandpa Joseph asked me to keep the house stable when he was dying. I did. Every time Dad missed a payment because he was playing big shot, my money kept that place from sliding into foreclosure. I've been floating this family while you all treated me like garbage. I heard him inhale sharply. For the first time in his life, Elijah the golden child had no snappy comeback ready. That's a lie, he stammered. That's not possible. Dad handles the finances. Ask Dad about the third-party transfers routed through the Joseph Bennett Estate Reserve. I challenged him. Ask Mom why the electricity never got shut off after they received 2 final notices in October. Ask yourself why this brilliant, wealthy family suddenly called me a mistake. when they're the ones who are flat broke. His tone shifted completely from arrogance to pure panic. Matthew, wait. If you were paying, you didn't stop, did you? I already did, I said. I logged in at 3 a.m. Every account is severed. Every autopay is dead. You can't do that, he shouted, his voice cracking loudly over the speaker. You can't just pull the rug out without warning. Interesting, I replied calmly. No one warned me before shredding my high school graduation photo and throwing it in the garbage. You're going to tank Mom and Dad over hurt feelings? He hissed. Hurt feelings? I let out a short, dry laugh. That's what privileged people call damage when they've never had to carry the weight of it. No, Elijah. I'm declining to continue financing people who use my money to keep the lights on so they can see clearly while they stab me in the back. He tried a different tactic instantly. The salesman kicked in. Look, let's meet up. Meet me for coffee. Please, just you and me. We can talk this out man to man. Why? I asked. Because this is bigger than you being emotional, he said. Then say the real reason, Elijah. Say the truth out loud right now or I hang up. A long pause. I could hear him breathing heavily into the receiver. Because Julian, the buyer, his lawyer is doing a final audit today, Elijah whispered, the defeat incredibly heavy in his voice. If the utilities show a lapse, or if the tax lien isn't cleared by Friday, the house deal falls apart. The buyer walks. Mom and Dad get nothing, and the bank takes the house next week. There it was. Not love. Not family unity. Pure exposure. Lincoln Square Cafe. Noon, I said, and hung up the phone. I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. I sat in a booth in the back, nursing an espresso, watching the door. Elijah walked in at exactly 12:15. He looked awful. He was wearing his expensive camel hair coat, but his hair was unkempt, and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't strut to the table like he usually did. He practically slumped into the booth across from me. He didn't even order a drink. He leaned over the small table, keeping his voice low so the other patrons wouldn't hear. Dad's bridge lender pulled out this morning, Elijah said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. He tried to leverage his stock portfolio, but it's empty. If those tax arrears show up on the title search today, Julian is walking away. That sounds incredibly stressful, I said, looking out the window at the gray Chicago sky. Elijah slammed his hand on the table, rattling my espresso cup. Be serious, Matthew. Mom is at home having a panic attack. She said some terrible things last night. Fine, we all did. I'm sorry I laughed. I'm not defending it. But if this sale collapses, they lose everything. Not everything, I corrected him, turning to look him dead in the eye. Just the house they were desperately preparing to sell while actively plotting to blame the foreclosure on me. Elijah froze, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly pale. How do you know about that? He breathed. I leaned back against the leather booth. I didn't just find documents in that trash bag, Elijah. I found the broken digital recorder Dad threw away. The one that accidentally recorded him and Mom drinking wine and planning to tell the entire extended family that I abandoned them. That I made a promise to buy the house and backed out to ruin them. You recorded them? Elijah looked horrified. No, I said sharply. They recorded themselves. They just forgot that I'm a professional audio engineer who knows how to restore corrupted hard drives. You can't use private family conversations like that, he pleaded. It's illegal. It's messed up. You used my existence in that family as a joke. I fired back, my voice low and dangerous. You used my grandfather's money as a slush fund. Dad forged my signature to steal from the reserve account. Don't sit there in a $1,000 coat and lecture me about what's messed up. Elijah stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He was looking at the ghost of his little brother, suddenly realizing the ghost was holding a match to his house. So, what do you want? Elijah asked, rubbing his face with both hands in exhaustion. You want me to pay you back? I don't have it, man. My salary is commission-based, the market is down, I'm leveraged to the hilt on the car. What do you want? Revenge. Yes, I said honestly. But more than revenge, I want accuracy. I want the lie to die before it ever leaves that house. I leaned over the table, closing the distance between us until he had to look me in the eye. No one says I abandoned this family, I told him. No one says I promised anything I didn't. No one says I am the reason you are broke. And if any of you try to spin this, if you try to make me the villain in your tragic little downfall to Aunt Sarah or Uncle Carter, you would destroy us, Elijah whispered. No, I said, standing up from the booth and tossing a $5 bill on the table to cover my coffee. I already stopped protecting you. You're going to destroy yourselves. I walked out of the cafe, leaving the golden child sitting alone, staring into the abyss of his family's ruin. Word travels fast in a family that runs on gossip. Travels even faster when panic is the fuel. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, my phone was blowing up with notifications from the extended family group chat. Uncle Carter, the undisputed king of covert manipulation, had summoned everyone for an emergency family dinner at his place in Oak Park. The message was perfectly crafted to sound like a crisis of my making. He wrote that my parents were dealing with an unprecedented emotional betrayal and needed the support of their loved ones. He didn't invite me. He didn't need to. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were circling the wagons. They were going to get ahead of the story, frame me as the ungrateful, unstable son who ruined their lives, and solidify their victimhood before the bank formally foreclosed on their house. I didn't stay in my apartment. I put on my best suit, grabbed the USB drive containing the restored audio files and the high-resolution scans of the forged bank documents, and drove straight to Oak Park. Uncle Carter's house was a massive Victorian colonial, usually filled with the smell of expensive cigars and roasted meat. I parked right in his driveway, blocking in 2 other cars. I didn't care. I walked up the porch steps and didn't bother knocking. I just turned the heavy brass knob and pushed the front door open. The house was packed. The dining room table was covered in catered food. My mother, Evelyn, was standing near the fireplace, holding a glass of white wine and dabbing her eyes with a tissue while Aunt Sarah rubbed her shoulder. Aunt Sarah, who was currently dragging her soon-to-be ex-husband through a vicious divorce and custody battle over their 2 kids, looked like she was absolutely thriving on the fresh drama my mother was providing. My father, Robert, was holding court near the kitchen island, his face red, gesturing wildly as he spoke to a group of my cousins. Elijah was sitting on the sofa, staring blankly at the floor. He was the only one who already knew the hurricane was about to hit. The moment my shoes hit the hardwood floor of the entryway, the chatter died. It didn't fade out. It snapped off like someone had cut a wire. 30 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Uncle Carter stepped forward from the dining room. He had a smug, condescending smile plastered across his face. The kind of smile a predator gives right before the trap snaps shut. Matthew, Carter said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. We honestly didn't think you would show your face here tonight. We weren't sure you still considered yourself part of this family after what you pulled. A few of my cousins exchanged nervous glances. My mother let out a loud, theatrical sob and buried her face in Aunt Sarah's shoulder. I didn't take off my coat. I just stood there in the center of the room, looking at all of them. That depends, Carter, I said, my voice carrying easily through the dead silent room. Is this the part of the evening where you all pretend I'm mentally unstable? Or is this the part where my father asks me to keep funding his fraudulent lifestyle? The room collectively stopped breathing. Carter's smug smile vanished instantly. My father pushed his way through the crowd. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He pointed a thick finger at my chest. You get out of this house right now. You are not going to come in here and disrespect us after you abandoned your responsibilities. My responsibilities? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I didn't yell. I spoke with absolute, terrifying precision. Let's talk about those responsibilities, Robert. I opened the digital ledger I had saved on my phone. On October 14th, 2 years ago, I paid $6,420 directly to Cook County to stop a tax lien from defaulting on your property. I read aloud. I looked up. Aunt Sarah had stopped rubbing my mother's shoulder. Her hand was frozen in midair. On March 3rd of last year, I paid $2,800 to cover a mortgage gap because you decided to lease a new luxury SUV instead of paying the bank. I continued, my voice steady, slicing through the tension. In fact, over the last 36 months, I have transferred a total of $84,000 from Grandpa Joseph's private inheritance reserve. A reserve he specifically put me in charge of because he knew you would blow it, just to keep the lights on in that house you are currently trying to sell. Cousin Wyatt, who was standing near the back of the room, actually dropped the cracker he was holding. "Wait," Wyatt said, his voice cracking. "Matthew was paying for your house?" "Shut up, Wyatt," my father roared. He turned back to me, his chest heaving. "This is private family business. You are taking a private financial misunderstanding and weaponizing it to embarrass us." "Embarrass you?" I took a step closer to him. He actually flinched and took a half step back. "You embarrassed yourselves when you threw my graduation photo in the garbage and called me your biggest mistake in front of half the people in this room. You made me a punchline. I am just providing the punchline with the receipts." My mother pushed past Aunt Sarah. Her tears were gone, replaced by vicious panic. "You are twisting the facts, Matthew. You manipulated your grandfather when he was sick." "Did I?" I asked. I held up the small black USB drive so everyone could see it, because I also brought the audio recording from the digital voice recorder Dad threw in the junk drawer. The one that accidentally recorded you both 2 weeks ago. I looked directly into my father's eyes. They were wide with sheer terror. "Do you want me to play the part where you admit to forging my signature on the trust documents, Robert?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Do you want them to hear you confess to committing federal wire fraud to drain the rest of the inheritance to cover your failed stock margins? Or should I just skip to the part where Evelyn suggests framing me for the entire bankruptcy so you don't lose face at the country club?" Aunt Sarah gasped loudly. Uncle Carter looked like he had been struck by lightning. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. The golden facade of the Bennett family was shattering into a million unrecoverable pieces right in front of their audience. Elijah finally stood up from the sofa. He looked sick. "Matthew, please, stop. They get it. We get it." "No, they don't," I said, turning my gaze back to my parents. "But they are going to. Here is my ultimatum. You have exactly 24 hours. I swept my eyes across the room, making sure every single person heard me clearly. "Within 24 hours, my parents will post a message in the family group chat. They will explicitly state that I did not abandon them. They will admit that I privately funded their lifestyle for 3 years. They will admit that they stole from Joseph's estate. And they will admit that they lied to all of you to cover it up. If that message is not sent by this time tomorrow, I take this USB drive to the police, to the bank's fraud department, and to Julian's real estate lawyer." My father looked like he was going to have a heart attack. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. My mother just stared at the floor, trembling violently. I put the USB drive back in my pocket. I looked at Uncle Carter, who was now sweating profusely. "And Carter, if I ever hear my name in your mouth again, I'll make sure everyone in your firm knows exactly how you run your betting pools." I turned my back on all of them and walked out the front door. The heavy silence followed me all the way down the driveway. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the wreckage. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from that dinner party moved faster than I could have ever predicted. I didn't even have to wait the full 24 hours. By midnight, I was sitting at my kitchen island in my apartment, watching my phone screen light up. Cousin Wyatt had been texting me under the table. According to him, the dinner party had descended into a total bloodbath after I left. Aunt Sarah had screamed at my mother for making her look like a fool. Uncle Carter had tried to distance himself entirely. And Elijah had received a phone call from Julian, the cash buyer for the house. Julian's lawyer had found the tax liens during the final audit. The deal was officially dead. Julian walked away, taking his cash with him. The Bennett family was officially out of time. Which brings us right back to 1:58 in the morning. The violent pounding on my apartment door. The desperate, pathetic begging echoing through the hallway. I stood there, looking through the peephole at the shattered remains of my abusers. The sheer panic on their faces was the most honest emotion I had ever seen them display. I slowly undid the deadbolt, but I kept the heavy steel security chain engaged. I opened the door just 2 inches. The cold hallway air slipped into my apartment. Matthew! My mother immediately shoved her fingers into the gap, trying to pry the door open further, but the steel chain held firm. Please, sweetheart, let us in. We can fix this. Take your hand out of the door, Evelyn, I said. My voice was completely flat. She flinched like I had struck her across the face with a whip, yanking her fingers back. You called me Evelyn, she whispered, fresh tears spilling over her ruined makeup. That's your name, I replied. You stopped being my mother the second you called me a mistake in front of an audience. My father pushed his way forward. He tried to puff out his chest, tried to summon that old, overbearing authority he had used to terrorize me my whole life. Matthew, this has gone far enough. You made your point at Carter's house. You humiliated us. Are you happy now? Now open this door and let's talk like a family. We aren't a family, Robert. We are a crime scene, I said, staring blankly into his bloodshot eyes. And I already gave you my terms. Why are you here? Because Julian pulled out, my mother sobbed, her voice echoing loudly. The bank is going to foreclose on Monday. They're going to take the house. We have nowhere to go. You have to transfer the reserve money back. You have to turn the accounts back on. The reserve money that Dad stole? I asked. The money he committed fraud to get? I don't have it. He blew it on the stock market. I couldn't save you now even if I wanted to, which I absolutely do not. My father's face contorted in anger. You ungrateful little. Stop it. The scream came from behind them. It was so loud, so raw, that both my parents physically jumped. It was Elijah. He pushed roughly past my father, his expensive coat slipping off his shoulder. His face was twisted in a mixture of pure terror and blinding rage. But the rage wasn't directed at me. It was directed at them. Stop yelling at him, Dad. Just stop it. Elijah screamed, his voice cracking violently. You lost the house. It's over. Julian just called my boss. Do you understand what you've done? My boss knows the title is dirty. He knows about the liens. Christian, my biggest client, is threatening to pull his portfolio from my desk because he thinks I'm tied up in your financial mess. My parents stared at Elijah in stunned, horrifying silence. The golden child was finally turning on his creators. Elijah pointed a shaking finger at my father. My salary is going to plummet. I might lose my license if the fraud investigation goes public. You used me as a prop to look rich, and now you're dragging me down with you. Elijah turned his wild eyes to me through the crack in the door. Matthew, please, if you take that audio to the police, the investigation will nuke my career. I'll lose everything. What do you want? I'll do whatever you want. I looked at my older brother. The guy who had laughed at my torn photographs just 24 hours ago was now quite literally begging for his professional life. I told you what I wanted at the cafe, Elijah, I said calmly. I want the truth. Tonight. Right now. In the family group chat. Elijah didn't hesitate. He pulled his brand new iPhone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped it. He unlocked the screen and opened the family messaging app. "Elijah, don't you dare," my father hissed, reaching out to grab the phone. Elijah violently slapped my father's hand away. The smack echoed sharply in the hallway. "Don't touch me. You did this. You forged his name. You stole from Grandpa. I am not going to prison or losing my career for your pride." Elijah began typing furiously. "I'm doing it, Matthew," he gasped out. "I'm telling them everything." My mother let out a horrific wail and sank to her knees right there on the cheap hallway carpet. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. My father just stood there, completely paralyzed, watching his golden son destroy their final shred of dignity. It took Elijah 3 full minutes to type out the message. He didn't soften the blow. He didn't use gentle words. Driven by pure self-preservation, he laid out every single fact. He confirmed the stolen inheritance. He confirmed the wire fraud. He confirmed that I had been paying their bills for 3 years. He confessed that they had planned to frame me for their bankruptcy. "Send it," I commanded. Elijah hit send. A second later, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and opened the chat. The message was there. A massive block of text exposing the Bennett family for exactly what they were. Almost immediately, the chat started exploding. Cousin Wyatt replied with a shocked emoji. Aunt Sarah left the group entirely. Uncle Carter sent a single question mark. The damage was done. The truth was permanent. I looked back through the gap in the door. My mother was still on the floor crying. My father was staring at the wall, completely broken. Elijah was looking at me, his chest heaving. "It's done," Elijah whispered. "Are we clear?" "We're clear," I said. "Don't ever contact me again." I shut the heavy oak door. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked loudly into place. I walked away from the door, went back to my kitchen island, and finally poured that cold cup of coffee down the sink. I slept perfectly that night. The following weeks were a masterclass in the absolute destruction of a fake legacy. When you build your entire life on a foundation of lies, it only takes one missing brick to bring the whole mansion down. Julian officially terminated the purchase contract. With no cash buyer to bail them out, the bank aggressively moved forward with the foreclosure. By the end of February, the sheriff's department was at my parents' front door, posting the eviction notice. My parents lost the house. They lost the cars. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped, 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. The social fallout was even worse than the financial ruin. The family group chat message had spread like wildfire. My mother's wealthy country club friends dropped her instantly. People who worship status despise nothing more than poverty, especially poverty caused by fraud. Uncle Carter was quietly asked to step down from his position on the local country club board. His reputation as a malicious gossip had finally caught up to him. Aunt Sarah's divorce actually got messier. Her husband's lawyer got wind of the family fraud and used it to argue that Sarah came from a financially unstable and morally bankrupt environment, heavily impacting the custody negotiations for her kids. Sarah blamed my parents entirely and stopped speaking to them. Elijah managed to keep his job, but just barely. He lost his massive promotion. His elite client, Christian, transferred his portfolio to a competing brokerage firm, citing trust issues. Elijah was forced to sell his Porsche to cover his own debts and started taking the train to work. And me? I flourished. The day after the confrontation at the door, I went into my studio feeling lighter than I had in 27 years. I wasn't carrying the weight of their secrets anymore. My boss, David, pulled me into his office that afternoon. He had been reviewing my recent audio restoration work on a massive historical documentary project. He offered me a senior engineering position on the spot, complete with a massive salary increase and my own private studio suite. I celebrated by taking Samuel out for a steak dinner. We sat in a high-end restaurant downtown, clinking our glasses. "You did it, man," Samuel said, grinning across the table. "You actually cut the cancer out." "I didn't just cut it out," I replied, taking a sip of my drink. I cauterized the wound. But I had one final piece of business to handle. I wasn't going to let my father walk away with Grandpa Joseph's stolen inheritance without facing legal consequences. I wasn't going to let that money just vanish into the ether of his bad stock trades. I hired a brutal, relentless estate lawyer. We filed a formal civil suit against my father for breach of fiduciary duty and fraud regarding the reserve account. I didn't press criminal charges. I didn't want the circus of a criminal trial dragging on for years, but I sued him for every penny he had misappropriated. My father didn't even have the money to hire a decent defense attorney. He settled out of court. We legally garnished his remaining retirement accounts and whatever meager wages he was making at a new, low-level consulting job he managed to find. I didn't keep a single dime of the recovered money. I took the entire amount, every dollar he had stolen from Grandpa Joseph's legacy, and donated it to a charity that funds college tuitions for underprivileged kids who actually want to work hard for their future. Grandpa Joseph would have loved that. About 4 months after the eviction, a cardboard box arrived at my apartment building. It was shipped via standard mail, and the return address was my parents' new, depressing apartment complex. I carried the box upstairs to my kitchen counter and cut the tape with a pocket knife. Inside were brand new, cheap wooden picture frames. Inside the frames were reprints of the photos they had torn up and thrown in the trash on New Year's Eve. My graduation photo, the 3rd grade portrait, the Polaroid from my 10th birthday party. They had clearly gone to an immense amount of trouble to track down digital copies or negatives from extended family members to reprint them. Sitting on top of the frames was a small, handwritten note on cheap lined paper. It was my mother's handwriting. "Matthew, we are so sorry. We were blind. Please let us try to fix this. We miss our son. Mom." I stood in my kitchen and read the note 3 times. I didn't feel a lump in my throat. I didn't feel a tear prick my eyes. The words felt completely empty. They didn't miss their son. They missed their punching bag. They missed the guy who quietly paid their bills. They were living in a cramped apartment, drowning in consequences, and they wanted their safety net back. I looked at the freshly framed photos. They were pristine, perfect, but they weren't the originals. The originals had been destroyed in a fit of cruel arrogance. You can apologize for breaking something into a million pieces. You can even try to buy a replacement. But replacement is not restoration. You do not get to shatter someone's soul and then dictate how and when they are supposed to heal. I took the Polaroid photo out of its frame. I carefully slipped it into the pages of a journal I kept on my desk. It was the only memory of Grandpa Joseph I truly needed. Then, I gathered up the rest of the brand new frames, walked out to the alley behind my apartment building, and dropped the entire box straight into the dumpster. I never replied to her note. It has been over 2 years since that freezing night in Chicago when I locked my door and walked away from my bloodline. People often hear stories like mine and they aggressively search for a comfortable moral lesson. Society loves a story of reconciliation. We are conditioned to believe that family unity is the ultimate goal, that grace must always be extended, and that shared DNA is a magical eraser for decades of abuse and manipulation. But that isn't the honest ending here. And I refuse to lie to you to make you feel comfortable. I did not take them back. I did not invite them to Thanksgiving dinner to sit around a turkey and pretend accountability magically erased history. I did not let the word family become a crowbar used to pry open my boundaries ever again. I kept my distance. I protected my peace. And in doing so, I built a life that is truly mine. I learned the hardest lesson a person can ever learn. Respecting yourself is not a selfish act. Walking away from a highly toxic, manipulative family is not cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Sometimes, the most powerful and profound form of love you will ever experience is the love you finally decide to give yourself when you stop letting blood ties excuse repeated harm. Family does not get unlimited VIP access to wound you just because they were in the room when you were named. You are allowed to choose peace over loyalty. You are allowed to choose truth over performance. You are allowed to choose distance over damage. Some people, like my parents and my brother, will only ever learn your true value when losing access to you becomes painfully expensive. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was heavy, and I know it was dark at times, but I hope this resonated with you in some way. We all carry scars from the people who were supposed to protect us. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved because staying was destroying you? If you made it all the way to the end of this video, you belong to a very special group. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. W stands for winner. It's the secret code for the 1% Club. The amazing people who stayed through the uncomfortable truths and the painful realizations, right to the very last second. When I see that W, I know you truly understand what it means to take your life back. Please hit that like button if this story meant something to you, and don't forget to follow and subscribe so we can continue to share these journeys together. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.